The death penalty is a practice that has been performed for the entirety of U.S. history and is therefore taken for granted in this country. People do not often think about whether or not it should be allowed. My name is Jeremy Risberg, and today I will be addressing a few commonly held beliefs about the death penalty and its effectiveness. I will refute some common arguments in favor of the death penalty and also make a few arguments of my own for why it should no longer be allowed in this country. Some have argued that there is a moral issue with the government having the authority to execute its own people, or that the death penalty is a barbaric and dated form of punishment. I will not be making these arguments, nor will I show sympathy towards violent criminals. This talk will be sticking to the facts and statistics, providing a clear distinction between the death penalty and more effective and fair forms of punishment. One common argument in favor of the death penalty is that it acts as a deterrent to violent crime. At first glance, this may seem to make sense. After all, who would want to commit a violent crime if it could leave their life in danger? However, this argument is not supported by facts or professional testimony. In fact, police chiefs ranked it last among ways to reduce violent crime, according to a 2009 study by the Death Penalty Information Center. They considered it the least efficient use of taxpayer money. Measures that they rated higher included increased funding for police forces and reduced drug and alcohol abuse. Statistics back these claims up. Southern states have the highest murder rate in the country, and they account for 80% of executions in the country. On the other hand, the northeastern United States accounts for 1% of executions, and they have the lowest murder rate in the country. Another common misconception about the death penalty is that it saves the taxpayer money. This is another logical stance. After all, it should be cheaper to execute a prisoner right after their trial, if they're convicted, than it should be to hold them for prison life, feeding and housing them. However, this doesn't hold up to scrutiny either. This is due to the fact that pre-trial, trial, and appeals costs for death penalty cases are more expensive than they would be for a life sentence. The death penalty has cost the state of California $4 billion since 1978. Florida, our home state, has had 44 executions since 1976, and they have each cost $24 million more than if life in prison were pursued. Relating back to my original argument, this money could have been better spent. It could have been spent on education, or if you want to reduce violent crime, it could have been spent on increasing funding for police forces. There is a number of ways this money could have been spent that would have better affected the American taxpayer or reduced violent crime. However, we chose to pursue the death penalty, and due to the nature of executions, prosecutors want to get the best evidence, and the defendants want to go through a lengthy appeals process to try and overturn their convictions so they will not be executed. This, of course, leads to my next argument, which is, in my opinion, the strongest argument in favor of the death penalty, rather against the death penalty. This is that innocent people are sentenced to death. In 1994, for example, a man named Anthony Graves was sentenced to death for the murder of a family of 6. This is despite a lack of evidence and no violent record by the defendant. He was released after 16 years served, and he was awarded $1.4 million for reparations. His prosecutor was disbarred for concealing evidence that would have proven his innocence. Before getting into statistics on this subject, I'd like to ask the audience what number of innocent people on death row would they find acceptable that we could keep the death penalty around. For me, that number is nothing short of 0. After all, if you're an innocent man on death row, if you're in that person's shoes, you're not going to be reassured by the fact that your situation is rare. An injustice to one person or to many is still an injustice, and in this case, it can be easily avoided. So, in that case, I am against the death penalty. Of course, this number is not zero. There have been 170 death penalty convictions that have been overturned since 1973. This means that there is one person exonerated for every 10 executed. Close to 10% of people on death row are in fact innocent or will be shown evidence that leads to their exoneration. There are many cases, in fact, where flawed investigations and an over-reliance on unreliable eyewitness testimony have led to a person's conviction and execution, with that person likely being innocent. And this is the main problem I have with the death penalty, is that it is irreversible. If new evidence comes to light later on and that person has already been executed, there's no going back. You can't make any kind of reparations for this because they're dead. Whereas if life in prison is pursued, they may have their freedom taken away, which is an injustice itself. They may be in prison for years or even decades, but at least if new evidence comes to light, there's a way to overturn this and try and make up for it. The death penalty does not allow for that. In conclusion, I think it is easy to see that, based on the information I've provided, the death penalty is not the most effective form of punishment for violent crimes. The death penalty is ineffective at deterring violent crime, and it is overly expensive. In addition to this, police and prosecutors convict enough innocent people and put them on death row with enough frequency to justify its removal from the U.S. all on its own. I hope that many in the audience and in state governments will give considerable thought to reversing this tradition in the coming years. Thank you.